Hello, ninth and 10th graders. We're in Chapter 16 of World History and Cultures, and I believe it's our last chapter that we're going to be doing this year. So we're finishing up pretty quickly, maybe a couple more lessons, and then you can go ahead and let's just clarify here. I told you guys that I would have a new grading program for you after the weekend, and I started to download the grading program, and I realized I would have to put 60 some people into that for the very last month of school. So I scrapped that for most of my classes. So what I'm going to do instead, since you only have the rest of chapter 16 to do for this year and the test review at the very end of your textbook, I'm going to just use that as your final test, and all of your homework for chapters 15 and 16. When you are finished with it, completely finished with the book, and we're done with lectures and everything, I want you to go ahead and turn your whole book into the front office. You can do that for me. I will collect them, I'll grade them, and then I will email you individually when I'm finished grading your book. I think that's the easiest way for us to do this at this time. We really don't have that much left to do, and this will keep you from having to constantly get online to input homework grades. It'll be a lot faster for me to grade. The turnaround time, I think, will be a lot faster. I'm trying to make this as easy as possible for everybody. If you absolutely cannot turn your book into the office, you can just continue to email me your grades and I'll take care of them that way. Please don't take a picture, because if you do that, I can't copy it into the reply and tell you what you got wrong or make comments on it or anything like that. Plus, it's really confusing when you take pictures of each assignment, and each assignment is 2 pages, and once you've downloaded them, they're not always in the right order, and that's a huge mess. So please don't do that to me. So please just finish your book. You don't have to turn it in. It's not going to be due until after we have finished everything in this chapter. Chapter 16, I believe, is our last chapter in your book. So it won't be until we're finished with the lectures in chapter 16. You should have your homework done by then. And then, chapter 16. And then you have your test review, which is going to act as your test this year, since we can't really do testing on your own. So as soon as you're done with chapter 16, you can do your test review. Once that is finished, you can turn in your book at the school. Please don't rush to get done ahead of time. Make sure you keep your book long enough to get through all the lectures first, okay? I'm not putting a really strict due date on the book because I don't think we really need one. I just need it turned in before I have to get all the grades in for your final grade for the year. So it gives you a little extra time to play around with, but it shouldn't be like weeks from now. Please don't do that. Just when you're finished, turn it in. Do a little bit every day. Don't let it sneak up on you. The test review, give it a couple days and really do exceptionally well in that last test. So that'll be a really good grade for you. Don't try to get through it as quickly as possible. Just take your time and turn it in when you're all done. So I'm not putting a firm due date on there, but it has to be done really before the end of this month, because next month is our last month of teaching. We're going to be done way before that. Yay. So let's get started. If we were in school, we would be going a lot slower, and I'd be adding a lot more to the lectures when it comes to like what we're watching, watching a movie here and there. In fact, I'm going to suggest a movie today that normally I would use for a whole class period. It would actually take up 2 class periods for that one. But that's stuff that we're going to go a lot faster because I'm not doing that in the classroom. So that's why. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. We're finishing chapter 16. We're still talking about the scientists. In 1682, an Englishman named Edmund Halley, or Halley, was one of the greatest astronomers of his day, and he correctly predicted the appearance of a comet, which still bears its name. It's seen about every 74 years, I believe it is, Halley's Comet. So 1682. So go ahead and write down Englishman Edmund Halley. I always heard it Haley growing up, but then when I became an adult and listened to some of the scientists discussing it, and they pronounced it Hallie, and I'm like, oh, so I've been saying that wrong my whole life. That's great. Okay. Okay. Also in 1682, big year for science, John Ray, a Puritan clergyman and naturalist, pioneered the science of taxonomy, that is classification. Classification. And originated the idea of species, that there are different species and subgroups within species. So he started that pioneering of taxonomy, classifying different things. For instance, a dog is a different species than a cat. You've got feline versus canine. And then within the feline classification, you have multiple other classifications within that, for wild cats versus house cats. Okay, during the 1700s, a botanist named Carolus Linnaeus, he was a devout Christian from Sweden. He expanded Ray's works and he established the modern system of biological classification. That's when you get the kingdoms and families and all of that in there as well. That's something I'm really not up on because it's not really my field of study. But when my kids were growing up and I really pushed science on them, and it really worked for Mr. S, the younger, because he became a science teacher. So yay me. Good mommy. Okay, I'm gonna give myself a pat on the back. For my other child, he was really more interested in the creative aspects, and so I focused on that for him. So for Mr. S the Younger, he did watch quite a lot of really badly produced science videos from the Moody Science Institute, and one of those dealt with Carolus Linnaeus and the idea of creating this gigantic family tree, and on that family tree were all the animals in different biological classifications. I remember that episode. The acting was horrible though. Okay, in 1714, German Gabriel Fahrenheit, his name wasn't German, he was a German named Gabriel Fahrenheit, invented the mercury thermometer and developed the temperature scale that bears his name. Before that, there was a Galilean thermometer that used little weights and pressure in a tube, but the Fahrenheit used mercury. The mercury would rise with a higher temperature and lower with the lower temperature. And he also developed the temperature scale that we still use today. In the United States, we use Fahrenheit quite often for temperatures. If you go to buy a bank that has the temperature of the, for the day out, it might say, it's 100 some degrees outside, and then afterwards it'll have an F. That means it's on the Fahrenheit scale. If it has a C after it, that's Celsius. In 1645, John Wilkins, a Puritan clergyman, led in the formation of the Philosophical College. That's a college of thought, which met regularly in London to conduct experiments and discuss scientific theories. And most of its members were Puritans. These were people who were looking at science from a God point of view, a God-centered point of view. And that's really important because today we have a lot of people who are scientists who look at God as something imaginary. They don't see him as being the creator of the universe, and people will often try to cause conflict between Christians and scientists by saying that scientists don't believe in God and Christians don't believe in science, which is really not true. There are plenty of Christian scientists still around today, and there are many, many Christians who are firm believers in the scientific method. I am one of them, even though science is not my bag. I do firmly believe in the scientific method, and I do appreciate what scientists do. This is one of the paintings of the day. I wish I remembered who painted it. I'm sorry I don't have that information in front of me right now, but what is important about this is in these societies, they would do these experiments where they would use the scientific method. They would start with a hypothesis, and then they would create experiments to prove those hypotheses. This specific experiment was that everything needs air to breathe. I know it seems like a duh moment, but you have to remember this is when everybody's looking at things that they've taken for granted for so many years, and now they're actually doing experiments to see if what they have thought for years is actually true. And so they would do these experiments. Unfortunately, they didn't care much for animal life the way they should have. And in fact, the Puritans became quite criticized for their absolute lack of sympathy towards animal life. I can't get behind them on that. I think that they were wrong in this specific case. There were novels written where Puritans and Puritan scientists, and even just regular Puritans who went to church, a couple times a week, were presented or pictured as almost monster-like in their total lack of concern for animal life. As far as they were concerned, what they were teaching was that because God put man in charge of animal lives, that because man had dominion over the animals, they could do whatever they wanted to animals. And there were a lot of people in England who found that really disturbing and frankly gross, because people would, torture or kill animals for fun, not hunting them, just, being really kind of cruel and mean. There's one particular book called Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, where she is working for a family who are Puritan and whose their son is absolutely psychotic and finds animals and tortures them. And at one time he is actually torturing a little bird. And Agnes Grey, his teacher, is seeing that the bird is not going to survive its injuries, is not going to, it's just suffering. And so she picks up a big rock and smashes the bird. And the little boy is so angry at her because she took away his plaything. That's the way he looked at it, and tattled on her to his parents, who then, instead of correcting their son's behavior for being cruel to this animal, they corrected her and said, God put us in dominion of all the animals. If he wants to torture an animal, he's perfectly allowed to do that. That is not what the Bible teaches at all. In fact, there are many cases in the Bible where the Bible talks about how mankind is to treat his animals with some kind of respect. Okay? So this is one of those issues where we're not seeing a lot of respect for animal life. We're seeing, animals are to be used for man's education. Okay? So this is what's going on here. Instead of in a big society meeting, this is an experiment that's being played out for a family. So it's a private experimentation. A father has brought in a scientist as entertainment for his family, and the scientist is showing that all things need air to breathe and to live. And so what the scientist is doing, and you can see the scientist is wearing a red robe, and he's got his hand on top of that glass bell, the jar there, and he's looking straight at us, the viewer. What he has done is he has taken a live bird, a dove piece, and stuck it into this bell jar, and he has sucked all the oxygen out of that jar, and the bird is dying. And you can see that there is a father showing this to his children and saying, why are you so upset? This is science. Look at the science experiment. It's amazing. Look at this. His daughters, that he's got his arm around one daughter will not look because it's so horrifying. The other daughter is looking with pity at this poor bird, which she should. There are two men sitting on either side of the table who are, one is contemplating what he is learning, and the other one is just watching the experiment almost without any kind of emotion. And then, of course, as happens in every classroom, there are two young people right next to the scientist who aren't paying a bit of attention to what's going on. They're busy flirting. Yeah, that's been going on for a lot of years. Okay, 1662. That society that got together and did experiments ended up evolving into the Royal Society for Improvement of Natural Knowledge, and that was formed in London under the leadership of John Wilkins. And this became the first permanent scientific society of the modern age. They even got so big that they sent out an explorer, James Cook, and he became famous for discovering the Sandwich Islands, also known as Hawaii, Australia, New Zealand. He traveled all around the Pacific, and that was a journey he took under the orders of the Royal Society of London. The earliest members of the Royal Society included Isaac Newton, Robert Hooke, Robert Boyle, Christopher Wren. We don't usually think of Christopher Wren as a scientist. He was a great architect, but that makes sense because architecture and mathematics kind of go hand in hand. So that makes sense that he would be also seen as a scientist. He is the one who created the Cathedral of St. Paul's in London. And if you want to get a really good picture of what that would look like, you can watch the old version of Mary Poppins. The woman who feeds the birds outside of the cathedral is pictured there, but the cathedral is mentioned because it belongs to Christopher Wren. Everything goes together. Okay, the French Academy of Science was founded in Paris in 1666, and it was largely supported by the Protestant Huguenots because the Protestants were more likely to question things. And then also Jansenists, who were a group of French Catholics who believed in salvation by God's grace, and they followed several of the Calvinist teachings, but most importantly, they believed in salvation and God's grace. There are plenty of saved Catholics out there. Don't let anybody tell you different. But this French Academy of Science came after the English Royal Society. Okay, before we go on any further, this is one of the things I was telling you about. If we were in the classroom, back when we talked about Henry VIII, I would have shown this documentary. It's really interesting. The guy who is the host of the documentary and also the producer of the documentary is a very high energy nerd, and God bless him. I understand where that's coming from. He is excited about what he is trying to teach us, and I appreciate that as a person who is also a high energy nerd. Yay! Okay. He goes through the life of Hans Holbein, who was the court painter for Henry VIII. And he painted a lot of people from that same era. So it gives you a lot of good background information on what it would be like to live in Henry VIII's court. Also, this was a Catholic painter who had to flee his homeland because the Lutherans took over and began to destroy Catholic property, which is something we don't hear a lot about in history. And that's something that we need to keep in mind, that a lot of these Protestant early reformers could get violent, and we need to remember that we didn't have like one group bad, one group good. No, they were bad and good on both sides. So if you get a chance, this can be found on Amazon Prime. If you have Amazon Prime, you have Amazon Prime Video available to you already, and it's free on Amazon Prime Video. It is not required viewing. I would do this in the classroom in a heartbeat. I have done it. I love it. I think it's really, really good. But I'm not going to require it of you because not everybody has access to it. But if you do have access, you want to watch it, it's really great. It's worth watching. Okay, we are talking about the Northern Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation, inaugurating a brand new era of cultural achievement, yay, marked by the abundance of classical works in music, art, and literature. This is where I live. I got one of my degrees in the humanities because I live in the humanities. I love music, art, and literature. Yabba hubba. Okay, a classic is a work of superior excellence that has stood the test of time, a work for all people of all ages. It doesn't have to be, an English writer wrote this, so therefore it's only for Englishmen. It can actually be used across the board. We are studying in another class, world literature, and we know that there are classics of world literature from all over the globe that we can still read and apply to our lives today. That is a good thing. Throughout history, classics have reflected the thinking of a generation that produced them, but they've also helped to shape the thinking of not just that generation, but of every generation after them as well. So this is a gorgeous piece of art. Ooh, yes. We can see there are 3 men to the right-hand side of this, and they are dressed in very gorgeous Oriental, meaning Eastern, clothing. They are the 3 wise men coming to visit Christ. So if we know that, and we can see baby Jesus reaching out towards the one man's beard, because who wouldn't? He's sitting on the lap of Mary, who is dressed in her typical pink and blue or red and blue. And then directly behind her is an older gentleman looking on. We can assume he is Joseph. Okay. All works, all human works should be evaluated in the light of the greatest classic of all, which is the Word of God, which is Asian inspired because it's from the continent of Asia. So a lot of what we read in the Bible, we have to take it into account that yes, it is the Bible, but it was written specifically to the Israelite people in the Old Testament and then to Christians in the New Testament and Christians throughout the world. So in the New Testament, we see the stories of Christ being taught and told to people in Asia, Africa, and Europe. So we're getting a good cross section there. So keep that in mind when we're reading things like Song of Solomon. Some of his pickup lines for his bride-to-be aren't exactly things that we would use today. You know, Mr. S doesn't come up to me and say, "Hey, baby, you have nice teeth." Okay, no, that's really not used. But we can still apply that. The idea that you give a woman a compliment is a good thing. Yes, do that. Okay. So when we talk about the greatest classic of all, the Word of God, which is the book for all people of all times and the one source of truth untainted by error, that's what we're looking for here. Even though it was written specifically to 1 or 2 or 3 groups of people, it actually can apply to everyone. Joaquin Dupree was the first musician of modern times. He was remembered for beautiful melodies and expressive harmonies. He was especially effective in suiting music to fit the text. Most music did have a text added to it. It wasn't just, instrumental. There was the word I was looking for. So write this one down, and then we'll go on to the next one. Joaquin Dupree. That's a good name. Martin Luther, the leader of the Protestant Reformation, was also a singer. And remember that at the time that he was protesting the church, one of the things he protested was that only the priests were allowed to sing, priests and nuns. But he was one of the singers. And he said, I think everybody should be able to sing, which is actually biblical. His most original and lasting music achievements were hymns known as chorals. It means you're singing directly out of the Bible, or it's a religious song. Does anybody remember his name of his most famous hymn? It's "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." I'm assuming at least one person shouted out, "Hi, Amy." Okay, Giovanni Pierluigi. Wow, great names. De Palestrina. So Giovanni Pierluigi de Palestrina. He was the chief musician of the Counter-Reformation. So the Catholic Church, this is one of the things that they kind of gave ground on after the Reformation, and they were now looking at the Counter-Reformation. They said, okay, we'll let everybody sing. That's fine. Well, that was one of the least important things, but that's what they went with. His music emphasized mysticism, the idea that you can't truly know God, and he returned to the music of the Roman Church, the spirit of the medieval ideal, the idea that you cannot reach God no matter how hard you try, that it is God way up high, you're an insignificant ant, and you need the church to stand in between the two of you. But he has a great name, Giovanni Pierluigi de Palestrina. Germany became the musical center of the world because that's where the Reformation took place. And it produced many of the world's greatest musicians, like this little dude. His name is Mozart. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I shouldn't say that, but I will. Just for fun. Next time you're at your grandparents' house or an older relative's house and you say Amadeus, and just see if they start singing the song. Amadeus, Amadeus. Just see. Just saying. Okay, Germany's musicians were greatly influenced by several Italian musicians. The Italian musicians were usually singing love songs. They were more like bards and scops. So Germany's musicians were influenced by the Italians, who were not religiously bent, but they were more romantically bent. Bent meaning that's the way they turn towards, what they turn towards. Okay, Monteverdi means Green Mountain. He created the opera. This is drama performed through music and singing. We have the opera, which everything is sung, and it takes forever because everything is sung with these beautiful high notes and low notes and trills. It takes forever for somebody to say, hi, how are you doing today? Then you have the operetta, where you have most of what is said is sung, but there is also some speaking part. And then you have the musical, where the majority of it is speaking part with some songs added in. That would be like today's Les Miserables or Chicago or Little Shop of Horrors. Corelli, he founded the classical technique for violin playing rather than just the folk music played on the fiddle. The violin and fiddle pretty much the same, it's just played differently and sometimes held differently as well. So Corelli was the first to come up with a classical technique for the playing of the violin. Corelli. Vivaldi, he developed instrumental music. You didn't need words to get your message across. You could sometimes relate directly through the musical notes. The three leading German musicians of the post-Reformation were Heinrich Schütz, Johann Sebastian Bach, and Georg Friedrich Handel. Of these three, Handel's my favorite. He played the Baroque form of music. I like Baroque because it sounds like the music is twining in on itself. It's circular in its playing, and I really love that. I think it's really incredible. Johann Sebastian Bach is famous for some Baroque as well, and I really do enjoy him as well. He played, and see, this is in classroom, we'd be spending a lot of time listening to some Handel and some Bach. So I suggest that you get a hold of some of those. Bach is famous for his, oh, wow, it's in D major. Toccata and Fugue in D major. It's the da 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 dun 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 that they use in a lot of haunted house and horror movies back in the day. Handel is famous for his Messiah, Handel's Messiah, and his water music. Heinrich Schütz is the most important composer before Bach. He wrote a collection of madrigals. These are elaborate songs based on poetry. His greatest contribution is his church music, for which he used the Bible as his text. The Bible is very poetic in most of its books, in the poetry books, obviously. So it's easy to set to music. So Heinrich Schütz, or Schütz. There you go. So write him down. I'm really not aware of too much of Heinrich Schütz. It's not really been my thing. So you guys look him up if you want to and listen to some of his music. Okay, Johann Sebastian Bach became one of history's greatest composers. He believed that everything should be done to the glory of God. He said that the aim of music is to produce a well-sounding harmony to the glory of God and the permissible delight of the Spirit. Some of Bach's most famous works include the Christmas Oratorio, St. Matthew's Passions, the Well-Tempered Clavier, and the Brandenburg Concertos, which are really beautiful. So you've gotten the bullet points, you've got some highlights here. So listen to some of this music today. You might have some on CD around your house, but of course you can easily look them up on YouTube. There are plenty of free concerts you can find on YouTube dealing with these great gentlemen. George Frederick Handel became interested in opera early in his musical career. He studied in Hamburg, Germany. That was the center of opera. And he wrote his first opera when he was 19 years old, which is really impressive. Remember, in opera, everything is sung. How are you? Good morning. Can I have a cappuccino? Yes, please. Thank you. Everything is sung. In his mid-50s, Handel discovered that his form, the format he used for writing, best suited to his own talents and style was the oratorio. That's a sacred choral work. It's often based using a biblical text. His most famous is the Messiah. It is a masterpiece that he wrote in 24 days, which is so impressive. He uses the Old Testament prophecies and their fulfillments in this oratorio. If you can, listen to the entire Messiah. I wouldn't be able to do that in the classroom because it would take way too long, but you could definitely do it, and it's beautiful. And if you get the English translation of the Messiah, which you can, if you look at the lyrics, get the lyric sheet in front of you, every single lyric for the Messiah is taken straight out of the Bible. It's really, really cool. Beautiful. The Hallelujah Chorus in the Messiah is perhaps the best known choral piece in the world. Now, when he performed this, or had it performed for the very first time, it was, I believe, George II who was listening to it at the time. And during this choral piece, and it is a magnificent choral piece, when it was over, George stood up. He was so impressed. He stood. He gave a standing ovation. And from that time on, traditionally, as soon as the Messiah starts, everybody stands up in respect for this incredible piece of music. Seriously, if you don't listen to any other part of the Messiah, listen to the Hallelujah Chorus. It's really great. Isaac Watts was the father of the English hymn. He revived the music of the church because he didn't like the previous music of the church. He was a pastor at the time. His father was also a pastor of a church, and the father got really sick and tired of Isaac Watts making fun of the people at their local churches and the fact that they couldn't sing worth anything. And Isaac Watts made fun of them, the way they sang and the way the music was written. And he said, Dad, it's just so hard to sing, because they were singing, the music was set to the translation of Proverbs and Psalms, and it didn't always fit. And people were using 3 or 4 notes to do 1 syllable words. And he's like, Dad, come on, this is horrible. And his dad had enough finally one day. And he finally said, look, if you can do better, do better. Write some music of your own instead of complaining about it all the time. And Isaac Watts took his dad up on that and created some great hymns. In fact, he wrote more than 600 hymns during his lifetime, including When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, which you have probably heard before. When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. And all of you know Joy to the World. You sing it every Christmas. And then, O God, our help in ages past, and alas, and did my Savior bleed. So these are very popular hymns that came straight from Watts and his determination to do better from the songs that they were singing before this. I'm going to stop right there because we are out of time, and I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy this part of history. It's my favorite part of history, learning about the humanities. So please work on your homework a little bit at a time. Get it done a little bit at a time. Take some extra time to go on YouTube and discover some of these great hymn writers and music writers of the past. Look at some art. And if you have Amazon Prime, please go ahead and watch that documentary. It's really good and it's very entertaining. He's a little bit of a goofball and I like him for that. So please take some time and do some learning on your own. And I will talk to you later. Bye.